Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our March 2023 webinar. We are excited. Excellent. We're excited to see you. As we always do when you come in, please put your place where you're hailing from today. And we know for some of you, depending on where you are in the world, it's not afternoon, it's evening. For some of you, it's still morning. So I know that we're coming in from all over the place. So let's just take a look. I'm gonna open up my chat and see as you say hello to everybody. And we can see where you're coming from this morning. Awesome. Yes, sunny Colorado, absolutely. I see Texas, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Oklahoma, everything is okay. I love it. Michigan, Long Island, and New York City, absolutely. California, I hope y'all are okay with all that rain that you're getting. Absolutely. I'm glad that you decided to come. Let's see. Brooklyn, love it. In the house. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you all. Thank you all for showing up. And I know this is going to be a lively discussion. If you've been with us before, we welcome spicy conversation. And we have some very spicy panelists today, handpicked by us, a CDC. Thank you. Thank you. So we're excited about this. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're going to keep inviting folks as they come on to mention where they're coming from. We often have folks from Canada, definitely coming in from the UK, and sometimes we even get Australia. So we're looking forward to seeing folks. So we do want to welcome you and so on, and we'll get started with our jingle. I see Tennessee and Kansas. Absolutely. Lovely. Oregon is logging in. Awesome. Thank you. So let's see. Let me share my screen and get us started. For our followers, you know, we had this jingle created for us. We are so excited to be able to share that with you. All right. Let's see if it'll start. Let's put us in slideshow mode. Again, welcome to all of you who are logging in. Some of you I know are at work and you're taking time for this professional development. Others of you are lucky to be working remotely, working from home. And some of you just might not be working at all. Awesome. So this is a great beginning for us. So today's topic is LGBTQ. We could have said QI, right? It include that. Black youth, acceptance, protection, and support. We are very happy to bring this back. This is a part 2 of a session that we did last fall. And the folks that are here today are really going to excite you with the work that they have done, their perspectives, and so on. I think who comes to mind really is Derek. When I met Derek, I think he had a t-shirt on that reflected how I feel. And we bonded in that moment of really talking about this idea of the Afrocentric community and to understand that our LGBTQI youth and adults belong within that Afrocentric community. And so we are going to talk about that a lot today. And so let me take you right here to talking about and introducing or reintroducing the CREST program team.
Okay, well, good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Dr. Constance West, and I serve as a co-founder of Crest Achieve, along with, of course, Dr. Sarisi West Olatunji, who's also CEO of Crest Program. We have as our team members, long-established team members, would be Dr. Ashley Pettion, who's our research fellow, formerly a graduate research assistant, who has moved on and up. And Ms. Janae Bonds, who is our graphic designer, formerly our social media intern. And the newest member of our team, next slide, is Miss Madison Brady. She's our social media intern. Madison is currently a junior at Xavier University of New Orleans. Her major is in mass communications with a minor in political science. She's really very accomplished already. She's very focused on student engagement. She's already been an author. She does articles for various newspapers, and she helps to bring awareness to Crest Program through social media efforts and increase two-way communication. So welcome, Madison. We've been looking for a long time, and it was worth the wait to have such an amazing person as a member to our team.
And so now let's introduce our panelists. I know you're just waiting to hear from them, absolutely. So we'll start with one of my former doctoral students at the University of Florida, Dr. Richmond Wynn. And Dr. Wynn is Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of North Florida. He provides strategic leadership for the university's coordinated model for diversity, equity, and inclusion that supports the university's strategic plan. And of course, he's a licensed mental health counselor, a certified addiction professional, and he is still associate professor in clinical mental health counseling in that department at his university. His research, as I well know, focuses on the intersectionality of identity, traumatic stress, and health outcomes. And he especially is interested in how LGBTQ persons negotiate their cultural identities and manage their health. So you can read more about Dr. Wynn on the Eventbrite link. I'm sure you already saw that. It probably is what drew you here as you took a look at those bios.
Thank you.
Okay, our second panelist is Mr. Derek Baugh. Derek Baugh is a native of Atlanta and a graduate of Georgia State University. He's a staunch advocate for many disenfranchised communities, most notably transgender community, the transgender community, and those affected by HIV. Mr. Baugh works to increase knowledge and visibility for the trans community by advocating for the inclusion of Black trans men, especially in conversations and spaces where healthcare is a topic. He also works to create unique programming and opportunities that serve to elevate the voices and increase the positive visibility of the trans community. In addition to serving as executive director of Ubuntu Incorporated, he also serves as a consultant for local and national organizations. Welcome, Mr. Baugh. I look forward to your input and everything that you will add to today's webinar.
And so I believe that Dr. Pettion, you'll be introducing Nicole Young-Turner.
Of course. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you our third panelist for today. It's Ms. Nicole Young-Turner. So she is the founder and executive director of Kaleidoscope Village, which is an LGBTQ+ inclusive community organization. And they have a mission of elevating the voices of LGBTQ youth, educating leaders with strategies to build culturally centered inclusive cultures and creating empowering spaces for all people within their village and beyond. So as you can see, Nicole and Kaleidoscope's vision aligns pretty closely with that of Crest, keeping culture at the center of what they do. So again, you can read Nicole's bio here, and you probably saw it on the Eventbrite as well. But we're really excited to have you here today, Nicole. Thank you for being here.
All right. So this is just a reminder, Crest Achieve is a subsidiary of Crest Program, and Crest Achieve focuses on culture-centered trauma-informed care for Black children and adolescents. We have the online learning, but We're creating a communiversity, as many of you already know. We are trying to help folks to decolonize their training that they've received in these auspicious environments where we've learned a lot about Eurocentrism, but not a whole lot about working with Black youth and other minoritized youth and what it is that we can do. So we're trying to help to make adults who work with Black youth to see them as having potential for academic excellence and for them to promote the emotional well-being of Black youth with the intentionality of understanding who they are as Black individuals. And so you can go on our training site and register for the training for Crest Achieve as well as others. So some of the others, and some of our services, I'm sorry. Of course, we work with schools, whether it's a district or it's an intact school, or sometimes we just work with Title I in an entire district or so on. And we can do consulting and so on. But at the individual level, if you're having difficulty getting your school or your district to consult with us, you can go ahead and get the training yourself. And so not only do we have the larger credentialing programs, you probably receive notices from us to engage in a 4-part series, a 3-part series, or even just that little short $10 training that we have. So we invite you to go beyond the webinar where we talk about things and provide information. The trainings are more skill-based. So we do encourage you to do that. And so just some reminders, of course, not only is there that, we launched the emancipatory research training. So those of you who engage in research, either at community agencies or you're engaged in your own research, again, if you want to decolonize the way in which you engage in research, we have an opportunity for you to go back and do it again and do it with much more respect for community members. And let's see, we are still looking for a new graduate research assistant. And what else? Other news, the spring newsletter came out. The winter newsletter came out and the Black History Month communique came out. But you can be on the lookout for our spring edition of Uplift, our newsletter. Of course, we ask you to support our work, even if you decide you're not going to do a training. You might just want to just donate and support the work that we do. And we'll be talking about the April webinar a little bit later. So save the date when we'll be talking about putting the race in ACEs. And then in May, we'll be talking about Black mothers. So save the date. You can see them here, right? Here we are with March, and then the April, early childhood, and May talking about Black mothers. Let's see. And Dr. West, were you going to add?
Yes, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so as Dr. West-Olutun has just said to you, in April, our focus will be on early childhood. It's a continuation of actually our most popular webinar, which was putting the race into ACEs part 1. So this time we're focusing on early childhood with the emphasis on the experiences of Dr. West-Olutun. And that will be Tuesday, April 25th. You can go ahead and register if you want. Go ahead and get out there. We've already had people registering, and we welcome you to attend. And as always, we need your input and feedback. So please complete the post-webinar survey. It only takes a couple of minutes. You can tell us about what you liked about our program, what any requests that you have, any suggestions that you have in general or specifically about topics for us to cover in future webinars. We are still in the process of developing our summer and fall webinar training series, and we're deciding on those topics. This is a perfect time for you to provide your input and feedback.
And so let's get right to it. And so we'll turn the next few slides and activities over to Dr. Pettyon.
Excuse me. All right. Thank you so much. So I wanted to, or we wanted to provide a foundation upon which our panel will be sharing their experiences and their ideas. And so we wanted to just kind of overview the landscape of what mental health looks like for our Black LGBTQ plus youth. So we know that this population of youth, they often report mental health challenges. So this includes even suicidal ideation. So we know that 44% have seriously considered suicide within the past 12 months. And this number is even higher for Black trans and non-binary. That's what that NB is, non-binary youth. We know that 55% of Black LGBTQ youth report symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder. So we're seeing a lot of anxiety symptomology within this population. And this is in the past 2 weeks. And again, we see that number even increased at 70% when we think about our Black trans youth and non-binary youth. We know that 44% of them have reported some type of self-harm. And again, we see this number higher, 61% for Black trans and non-binary youth. And we know that they want help. We know that at least 49%, almost half of them reported wanting counseling from a mental health professional in the past year, but not being able to get it. So overall, I hope that you take from this that help is needed and that they want it. And this is exactly why we're here today, to talk about ways to best support our Black LGBTQ youth.
Right, so I'm going to stop the share right now so we can engage in our conversation.
Okay, thank you for that. So our panelists, we are excited to hear from you. With that little bit of background, we heard also a little bit about what you do, but to give our audience a little bit maybe more concrete examples of things that you are doing, can you talk to us about some of maybe what like the rewarding aspects of the work that you do with Black LGBTQ youth? I know some of you work with college students and some of you are working with kiddos, with youth. And so talk to us about your work, maybe some of the rewarding aspects and what it looks like for you.
So should we draw straws? Okay. So just add a little bit more about my background. I volunteered with an LGBTQ youth organization for over 20, 25, 26 years. Still involved to some degree. I don't work directly with the youth in that organization anymore, but still involved with the governance structure. And then I work here at the University of North Florida, and our Office of Diversity and Inclusion, which I lead, includes 4 cultural centers. And one of those centers is our LGBTQ center. And so as you might imagine, we have quite a few LGBTQ students who are both student assistants in that center, as well as take advantage of the resources that we offer through the LGBTQ Center. We have a lot of allies who participate in our program too, so it's not just LGBTQ youth. So with that, I have certainly. Let me add one more thing, and then in my personal life, I have, interact with scores of Black LGBTQ youth. One thing I have really been impressed with and enjoy experiencing in whatever capacity I'm working with our youth is their overall resilience. I love to see the creativity come through, particularly as they find their voice and they find that space to be their authentic selves, when they really connect to the support that is available and that they need support just because they're youth, period. And then you add on them being Black youth and being Black LGBTQ youth, their needs for support are varied. And when they're able to take advantage of that support and connect, as we say on our campus, our mascot is an osprey, is a bird of prey, but so we connect people, help people find their flock. So when they find their flock, just to see it's like someone's turned on a light switch, and they can be as fabulous as they want to be. They can be as introverted as they want to be, but what I see and what resonates with me is the confidence, is them knowing that they belong here and that the world would not be the same without them. And so that's inspiring. That is very inspiring to me.
Thank you for that, Dr. Wynn. We'll invite other panelists in no particular order.
I will, again, my name is Derek. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I serve as the executive director of Ubuntu Inc., organization based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And the youth that I work with typically come through my housing program, which is a transitional housing program which it's for Black trans men. How do I want to say that? We prioritize Black trans men. We prioritize Black trans men. And so what I am seeing lately is an uptick of that 18 to 24 youth experiencing homelessness and situations of not having that familial support, just kind of like being thrown to the wolves. And so what's been really rewarding for me lately is kind of when they are having those aha moments, whether it's learning to take the bus, learning how to celebrate, learning how to set an appointment for themselves, things like that really are like, it makes me feel like they're really getting that sure footing. And that's been really rewarding lately.
Hey everyone, my name is Nicole Young-Turner, and again, I am the founder and executive director of Kaleidoscope Village. And we work directly with schools, K through 12, as well as youth serving organizations. And just as Derek and Dr. Wynn mentioned, one of the things that has been just truly impactful and inspiring when I think about my work with Black LGBTQ youth is their power, right? Their resilience, and when they connect and really realize that their voices are the most important in the room. I have seen where a group of students completely transform the culture of an entire high school. Worked in a high school here in Atlanta to drive youth programming. And, you know, the entire school came out and celebrated Coming Out Day, right? Whereas the previous year before, there had been no absolute mention of LGBTQ identity. So when I think about the resilience and the power and the resources that we're offering the students, it's amazing to see how, again, they are able to transform entire systems and institutions. And I think back personally, when I came out, when I was 15 in public school here in Atlanta, I was the only LGBTQ person I knew. And so to see 15 years later, our students continuing the movement and continuing to elevate their voices just inspires me to get up and do this work every day.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing that background. It helps to illuminate the work that you do and help us to center the rest of our discussion. Are we going to ask another question before doing the next set of slides?
Yeah, I think you can ask another question and then we'll loop back to another slide.
All right, sounds good. So like I said, we got a little bit of foundation understanding what, statistically what Black LGBTQ youth are facing in terms of mental health challenges. We have a better understanding of the work that you all do and some of the rewarding aspects. I wanted to swing the pendulum the other way. At CREST program, we're all about culture-centered, trauma-informed care. And we acknowledge that unfortunately, our Black LGBTQ that are more susceptible to like higher rates of race-based trauma, anti-queer trauma, like those sorts of things. So I'm curious, based upon your experiences, what are the most common or maybe like the most impactful types of traumatic experiences or traumas that the youth that you work with face, right? So you can give us some examples. A few of you spoke about personal and professional examples. So if you have those, you can share them. But for us to be able to see like what this looks like for this population within the school setting, within families, within communities, talk to us about what this has looked like for you. And again, in no particular order.
I guess I will start. Because I work specifically in the education and school context, I have been become very aware of the everyday, what we call microaggressions, but I call them macroaggressions that our kids experience. Most often, like on the news, we hear about, the more serious forms of abuse, but our kids are living every day and walking every day in hallways where their educators and their teachers and their principals and even their counselors are using slurs, right? I've had kids come and tell me that they are being called the F word by an adult in the building. So I think just on that very base level, the language is very violent. Our students are also, learning in environments where, and I say specifically with the communities that I work with, where they are being taught and being led by folks of color and being empowered to be proud of their racial and ethnic background, and at the same time, being completely disempowered around their gender and sexual orientation. And so that mixed messaging that students are experiencing year over year, mixed in with the unchecked verbal and sometimes physical harassment coming from fellow students, but also from adults that are entrusted with their safety, is something that I think, kind of gets hidden in the news lines, but it is an everyday reality for our students.
Mm-hmm. That really captures something, Nicole. And to me, that there's a sense of abandonment that I think a lot of our Black LGBTQ youth are experiencing, because I am a gay man and grew up in a very religious home, Judeo-Christian. My parents' version of Judeo-Christianity, I'll make sure I say it that way, their version of it was not accepting at all. And while there weren't regular negative messages, the silence was deafening. The examples of people in our community that were known to be gay or lesbian, we didn't know too many bisexual or transgender people, and the word queer wasn't used a lot at that time. But some of the remarks or references to those people, while not extremely toxic, they were not positive, and certainly not reinforcing. And so I witness all of this. And so one thing to remember about people in general, but especially kids, is that they see everything that is being done and what's not being done, and they hear what's being said, and they also hear what's not being said. And when that scenario you described, Nicole, of getting the positive reinforcement of our Blackness, and on the one hand, but then being completely ignored or even denigrated, chastised, outcast because of our sexual orientation, gender identity, creates an automatic conflict on the inside. And when our youth are experiencing that from many places, so I experienced that in my own home, in my neighborhood, in my church. But when I look around, when you see, especially, what is happening with the scores of anti-LGBTQ bills that are here in Florida and other places around the country, again, our youth see that, they hear that, they see that. And and for those youth who might not live in a state that has a lot of anti-LGBTQ legislation right now, they see what's going on in other states, and we're identifying with those people. That's that vicarious experience. And so while I may not be facing it right here today in front of me, people who identify in the same way that I do are experiencing these things. And so I experience them vicariously. I think abandonment is huge. I can't tell you the number of young people who I work with, primarily when I worked in the youth center, who were just dismissed from their home, who was kicked out from their homes at age like 13 is the youngest that I've ever worked with, simply because either the parents I found out that they identified as LGBTQ, or they had friends who showed up at their house who identified or appeared to be LGBTQ, and they were told that you have to leave. And it was just horrifying the first 20 times I heard that story. And I'm not exaggerating. It's just, it has been, it's epidemic. And I'm always confused as to why that's not considered child abuse or child abandonment, but it has not been. So I think abandonment is certainly one of the impacts. The violence, exposure to violence, both personally, directly, and vicariously. How many times have we read about Black trans women in particular being just flat out murdered in the streets? And oftentimes very little is done about that, and the community has to rally to, in some cases, to get the police to even investigate it. And when they do, they often misgender our trans women. They intentionally create conditions that further put them at further risk for safety. So if there's incarceration involved, they may not be incarcerated in the part of the jail that matches their gender identity, and so that creates another an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. Scores of discrimination. We too experience racism in much the same ways as others, and it just gets multiplied and exacerbated with the anti-LGBTQ sentiments. Our young people are also experiencing environments where there are low resources and they don't have access. You mentioned in the slide earlier that many of the youth want counseling but can't get it. And the first thing I thought was, what are the barriers to access? So part of the barrier may be that they themselves feel that counseling is not for them. And we can talk more about how we as Black people have seen counseling, have generally speaking, seen counseling in the past. That could be part of it. The other part is it going to be somebody who understands me, or is this going to be somebody who tries to get me into conversion therapy? And then do I have the resources? Do I live in a place where I can access counseling at little or no cost, if that's a concern for me? And if not, then what are my resources? And can I access those? Can I, as a young person who's not 18, access those resources without my parents' support? Exactly. And I may not have my parents' support. For instance, and I'll shut up a moment. Here in Florida, y'all know Florida is something else, right? So here in Florida, there's a lot of legislation going on that is just, dragging us backwards so many decades. And one of the bills last year that was passed was around working with LGBTQ youth in schools. And it was named Don't Say Gay Bill, although technically that wasn't the name for it. It was parental rights. And my first thought was, what about the kids' rights? What about, if we got all this stuff around parental rights, what about children's rights? But so right now, if a child goes to a teacher or any school personnel and says, look, I think I might be gay, or I am gay, or I am trans, or I'm lesbian, and I just want to talk to you about it, or this is how it's impacting me, and using the school resources, including the school counselors and mental health counselors in schools, the school personnel are required to call their parents and let them know that their child has identified as gay, or has asked to use their pronouns that may be different from what they were assigned at birth. And imagine that if a kid is coming to you because you're a safe person, and then you have to turn around and call their parents who may not be safe people. And it's just, and that just sets up a cycle of repeated traumatic experiences, and the fear and intimidation that is a part of that. It's just very heavy.
So to add really to a lot of what's being said. I would say in the beginning, Nicole had said about the words and people being called different things. And a lot of times when we have these conversations about how names and different things affect children, it's kind of like, especially as Black people, it's like, well, the world is going to get tough on you, so you have to get used to other people, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I've even heard people be like, oh, well, you know, they picked on Jesus Christ. And my mom, even though she's really crummy about this whole me being trans thing, whenever someone would say that to me, she would say, yeah, his dad didn't like it either. He flooded the earth. And so with that, these words become actions, and these actions cost kids their lives, whether it's suicide or some sort of gender-based violence. Words become actions. And so we have to be careful in the barbershops, around the dinner table, you know, even with our outdated language. It's not kids being sensitive. Like, if you have to watch what you say to people. Kids are people too. And this kind of talk and terminology, it does lead to children, especially Black kids. And I think, you know, I think a lot of times in the community, we are like tough on our kids because we know that the world is a tough place. But I think it should be the opposite, and we should be softer on them because the world is a tough place, and they're going to go seek it from somewhere else if they can't get it from us. And so we're already ostracized in a lot of ways. And then when we come into our own communities, we are ostracized because suddenly my sexual orientation or my gender identity separates me from my Blackness. And I wrote an article about this. Does my Blackness diminish based on my trans identity? It doesn't.
Come on now.
Because my Blackness enters the room before I do. So, you know, people see me, like, I'm walking down the street. Nobody knows I'm trans. Nobody knows that until I disclose it to them. But they know that I'm Black. They know that. I can't take that off. I wouldn't want to take it off, but I can't take that off. But a lot of times in community, I'm treated different. Once the cat's out of the bag that you're trans, suddenly people are slipping up. Suddenly people are trying to, well, what's your real name? No, what's the name your mama gets? Suddenly it's like that. And it's like, you're not entitled to any of that information. And then with the babies, it's, and I say babies, I mean kids, like all the youth that we deal with, they're lumped in based on whatever understanding people have of identities, gender diverse identities, sexually diverse identities. They're lumped in, and then they're limited based on whatever perception that is that people have. And it's very, it is very heavy. It's very heavy. I can't imagine living somewhere like Florida. It's very heavy. The T in the LGBT acronym is the only one that's a gender identity. It is not a sexuality, but we get lumped in anyway. And so if a child comes out as trans, it's suddenly everybody's worried about their sexuality. And to me, I feel like if you're worried about a child's sexuality, that's a different conversation. I am not the one with the agenda. And back to the piece about Blackness is, I'm dealing with a young man right now who has had to navigate the foster care system, who has like really had to kind of rely on just the kindness of whoever at whatever time. And we are having a conversation the other day, and he said, I don't want to go to an HBCU. He just graduated high school. We just got him through high school. He said, I don't want to go through to a HBCU. And I said, and I thought to myself, you would hope an HBCU wants you to go there. Like, it's not, I don't know what you think, but it's not that kind of party. Like, it ain't no, everybody can't go. And so then I asked him and said, why would you not want to go to an HBCU? And his immediate response was, they don't appreciate trans people. They don't, you know, I like this. They're not going to like me if I like this and I like that. And which I expressed to him that, like, all of these things belong to you. All of these things can belong to you. Like, you can have many facets of your identity, but like this Black piece, and I'm having to introduce him to stuff because he hasn't been in the company of, like, he hasn't had the opportunity to meet a lot of Black folks like me. And so he hasn't had the introduction to like all of the cult classic films, all of the TV shows and things like that. And so it's this slow introduction to like being Black here in America for him, because he's only been exposed to Blackness from a white perspective in America. And so That's
Whoa, whoa.
that's a
Oh,
Hold on a
wow.
second there, Cedric.
that's a lot. So that's a
Sink in for
whole
a
nother
second.
piece. And so I'm trying to tell him, like, no, like this is mine, this is yours, this is ours. Like your transness doesn't take that away from you. Like, no, this belongs to you too. And just to hit on a final point, throwing these children to the wolves, as we're seeing with the parents, as we're seeing with the legislators and things like that, it really does affect them in a myriad of ways. We talk about mental and emotional, economic standpoint. Well, if you're gonna be like that, you can't stay in my house. Well, suddenly I'm 18, I'm on the street trying to find my way, and now I'm in a situation of exploitation.
Yeah,
Well, you can stay on my couch if you'll do this for me.
yeah,
And then suddenly I'm at a larger risk for a sexually transmitted infection.
yeah.
And then suddenly I'm, like it's this rolling, instead of just trying to have an understanding. And it's really frustrating to see it just play out over and over again.
Mm.
Mm. Y'all
Dang.
see why we invited them? Do you see this right here? We're
Oh
not
my
gonna get this in other places now.
goodness.
Like, come on now. Absolutely. All right, Dr. Pettion, would you like to continue? Let me see if let's see if I can make that happen.
Yes, while you're doing that, I wanted to remind our audience that the chat is booming. We thank you for your comments, and I see folks making some connections there as well. We've got some hashtags going. Kids are people too. Intersectionality, yes, please continue sharing your thoughts in the chat. I did also want to invite you all to use the Q&A feature. So you know that we have our list of questions, but at the end, we're hoping to save some time to answer questions from you all. So so that it doesn't get lost in the chat, which I said is really booming. Make sure you put it inside the Q&A feature in Zoom so that we can address that towards the end of the webinar. So thank you.
Mhm.
And we're almost there.
Mhm.
Okay, so we wanted to, we got like an overview of the statistics. We have an understanding of the work that our panelists do and what it kind of looks like for youth to be out there having these sorts of issues, the types of traumas that they experience. We even got a little bit of background on what it could look like in religious spaces, academic spaces, even college and university spaces. So let's hold on to those things. We wanted to kind of shift the conversation to talking about resiliency and protective factors and things that can be helpful for our Black LGBTQ youth in these different spaces. So when we think about protective factors, name is as it is. These are factors in our Black LGBTQ youth, like in their lives, that may protect them from additional like mental health challenges, harm, like all the things that you heard our panelists talking about. So what does this look like? So we know that 82% of Black LGBTQ youth have reported at least one supportive person in their life. So at face value, this looks really large, but thinking of just at least one supportive person, we know that 82% of them reported access to at least one in-person LGBTQ affirming space. Okay. And we know that when they have access to this space, they are attempting suicide at about half lower of a rate compared to those who don't have access to such a space. So all the wonderful like organizations that you all are sharing in the chat, the work that you do, the work that we're hearing from our panelists, these are examples of those spaces. And we see here through these statistics just how helpful they are in serving as protective factors for our Black LGBTQ youth. We know that Black, trans, and non-binary youth, which if you remember from our previous slides, they exhibit higher rates of mental health symptomology and challenges, but we know that when they report family support, that they have lower rates of attempted suicide. So if you gain nothing from this slide, I hope that you understand the importance of support persons and supportive spaces within families and communities for Black LGBTQ youth and how they can really be life-saving.
All right, so that takes us to continuation, and I believe Dr. Pettion has more questions.
I do. So on the note of protective factors and resiliency, if you all panelists would share some examples of what that has looked like. So you all talked about some of the challenges that the youth that you serve, the challenges that they face. But when you think about even personal and professional experiences, what are some examples of resiliency? What does that look like for you? In no particular order.
I started up earlier saying what inspires me and what's rewarding for me is youth finding their voice and they're unleashing their creativity, because finding your voice, along with that comes confidence. And I think about myself as a young boy who, as a young boy, you might have thought I was shy, but I wasn't shy. I lacked confidence. And I had for a long time, I had this sense of, I just need to break out of this shell, whatever this thing is, and be this other thing. And I didn't even know all the names and all the language to call this thing I wanted to be, but I know it wasn't the way I was living. And so fortunately for me, I kind of got permission to that a little bit later in life, beyond my youth. I got permission, and I gave myself permission after having trusted adults in my life to help facilitate that, to be me. And just remembering how freeing that was. So resilience, for me, when I think about resilience in our Black LGBTQ youth, they know, there is a part of them that knows their value and worth. And they may not be able to exercise it. They may not be able to demonstrate or display it at all times, but there's somewhere in here. There's somewhere in here where there's a knowing that I am valuable, I'm worthy, and I have something to contribute, I have something to offer this world. So helping uncover that is so important. And that's, for me, that's an approach as a counselor, as a trusted adult, as a helper. I always want to help uncover who that person is on the inside. And that may be covered by layers and layers of stuff, but there is a person in there that is waiting for permission to be authentic. Mm-hmm. And I think that is so important to start out there. And then they'll tell you, once you help open the door, they'll tell you who they are consistently, and they'll show you who they are consistently. I think it's important to help them embrace their Blackness and embrace their spirituality or religion or whatever, even for non-religious people. Because, for some Black youth, it might be very, very dangerous to come out as non-religious, right? And so I think helping to create that space that says, whoever you tell us you are, is who we celebrate, and to eliminate or minimize the boxes. So anyway, I'll stop there and let others chime in.
I would agree with what you said, and I would add that a lot of times, I'm just speaking from a trans perspective right now, we get accused of like not really being sure or not knowing things. And I would caution people that transition is a process. We're always going through transition. You were a baby, now you're an adult. You were a teenager, now you're older. Like, we're always transitioning to something. You used to really enjoy cheese pizza, now you like pepperoni. Everything is a transition. And so when we ourselves are transitioning, we might do different things. We might start out with no pronouns. We might start out with they, them pronouns. We might, I know for me, when I was trying to figure out like, okay, well, I know this is me. What do I want to be called? Because this is what I was given, and this doesn't fit me. It's like a sweater that somebody gave me and it didn't fit me. So I had to figure out for myself what it is that I like, what was more my style, what sounded like me. And so what myself and my wife did, we had a whiteboard, and we tried on a bunch of different names. I had the luxury of doing that here with her at our house, to where it wasn't like out in public and it looked like, oh, you just keep changing your name. We need to change until we find something that fits us. my brother, we used to call him, I'm not gonna say we used to call him something, but we don't call him that anymore because he's an adult. And you know how we are, we have nicknames. But I would caution any adult, if a trans youth trusts you enough with this much of themselves, like allow them to evolve, allow them to change, allow them to feel their way through. And that's been huge for me, being able to just feel my way through, and having people, and when I was younger, adults in my life that were just like supportive and just allowed me to be me and figure out who me was, because we're not just born knowing, we don't know. And something that I've learned even more so as an adult is to not like with the young man I'm dealing with now, he really enjoys like K-pop and those sorts of things. That's not my thing. But again, there's more than one way to be Black. You know, he can be a Black young man and enjoy those things. And so like, I'm just like, okay, like put on your music or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I just let him be him. Like I'm going to listen to Anita Baker. He's going to listen to his K-pop, and we're still going to be Black at the end of the day. You know, so just be careful not to force your identity, the facets of your identity on that youth. And I would also like caution parents and caregivers not to rely on the fact that they're resilient, not to rely on that, oh, they'll get over it. Because sometimes we don't. Sometimes we carry that with us, especially those mother wounds, those father wounds. They can really mess you up later on in life, and they bleed into everything, and you don't even realize that you're cut. So, you know, be careful. Young people are very tender. Let's be careful with them.
That's a really good point. I love that idea that will they get over it? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we go to our graves with that same pain and that same hurt. Or sometimes we limp along for decades when we could have had that issue addressed. So it becomes, sometimes we just need to handle it.
And it impacts the quality of your relationships. And we may not even understand, why do I keep having these difficult relationships or abusive relationships, or I'm not showing up as my true self in my relationships, and not connected back to those experiences. And so while, you know, certainly there are devastating consequences to what we're talking about, but in some cases, it might not be so devastating, but it is a slow destruction over time.
And when I think about the, impacts of spaces, right, and the impact of safe spaces, I think that's really important for, like Derek mentioned and Dr. Wynn mentioned, for our students to really be able to process authentically, right? In many cases, especially as Black folk, right, we are told to, be strong and suck it up, and you can't tell everything to everybody, and that is multifold and manifold for our LGBTQ youth. And so like Kaleidoscope Village is like, we got to create the village. We got to be able to help our youth find a village where they can truly be all of who they are, all of those pieces of the kaleidoscope. Really excited that like last week we celebrated Trans Day of Visibility as well as Women's History Month by putting on an event in the city. At the National Center of Civil and Human Rights. I think even that venue was important to show our kids that like, you belong in the middle of this city in one of the nicest, biggest buildings that people come from out of town, right, to visit, not some dungeon somewhere. You belong here, and in this space, you get to talk to your living ancestors, a trans woman who fought, the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. You get to talk about, I had a 6-year-old in this space, talk about how they are being, abused even in kindergarten because they're trans. And so these are things that I'm not even sure, exist without these really important spaces. And as these kids are experiencing this and going through the process and the journey of becoming, all of us know the importance of like, safe space, but also just like a real courageous space for you to have those critical and compassionate conversations and know that you will be held and not judged, and know that you can walk into this space and not have to put on a mask in any way. So just, I'm grateful that like that statistic truly shows the impact of, again, like authentic true spaces where it is support and there is, truly a village.
Mhm. Mhm.
I just want to add to that what you're talking about with safe spaces. Safe spaces, I said this yesterday to somebody. If there are marginalized people in the space, especially if the majority is marginalized people, Black, trans, LGBTQ people, the space is already safe.
Period.
The space is already safe. We need you as people who are providing mental health care, whole body care, anything. We need you to be brave when you come into that space, because if you ask something that's a bit, we're going to ask you about what you asked and why you asked it and what was your intention. So we just need you to be brave in that space. So I'm a big proponent of brave spaces, because I know that once I'm there, the space is already safe. I'm gonna make sure don't nobody jump on you,
Mhm.
but I need you to help me help you.
Mhm.
And the second thing I would say is, since we're throwing out Trans Day of Visibility events, April 1st in Grant Park, we do have an event coming up. It's a cookout. It's catered. It's free. There's a bouncy house. We got spades, tables, and a DJ and everything. That'll be next Saturday for Trans Day of Visibility at Grant Park from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Come out, bring your family, bring your friends. We're just going to have a good time, and we're going to be visible.
Love it, love it. We are at a great place right now to get some of these questions. I'm going into the Q&A, so I don't know if some of you have gone in to take a look and whether or not you've actually answered some of these questions, but I'm going to start at the top, and Dr. West will join me by trying to do these. So first we have, as a Hispanic but white passing therapist, what are some of the culturally appropriate ways to connect with BIPOC families who are struggling with acceptance of their LGBTQ plus child? So we're at that place of talking about culture-centered interventions where we're placing culture at the center. So anybody want to tackle that one?
I will just say real quick, I can't speak from a therapist perspective, but I can say I know that a fear that a lot of parents have is like they fear how the world will receive their child. And so then they turn around and they externalize that to the child. And I will say that, like, if it is a phase, because that's the way it starts. Oh, it's just a phase. Oh, he likes to play with dolls. It's just a phase. It starts that way. If it's a phase, let them go through it. Let them go through it. Let them evolve. Let them feel their way through it. Let them. That will be what I would say.
Oh, go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, I actually have something from like an educator perspective and really working with parents. I taught mostly Latinx students. And so what I found to be really important, but also kind of simple, is that like representation matters. I think a really important strategy is being able to offer parents, offer families, and even offer the student representations of LGBTQ folks, leaders, movements, cultural, important events that truly connect their culture with the queer identity. I purposefully added 2S to the Kaleidoscope Village mission because quite often our Indigenous folks are left out of the LGBTQ conversation when there is just a deep, rich history of queerness and queer leadership. So I know, you see that a lot on social media, but really having those conversations about like, queer people do belong, in your culture. Queer people have always been here, and they have been the bedrock of, the liberation movements and the social movements that we are still now facing. And I think, again, it not coming from you as a queer person, but truly, externalizing it and helping that family understand how this fits into their idea of what their family is, has been helpful.
I think it is important that family members of BIPOC queer youth have a space to explore their concerns, their conflicts. I always believed my parents loved me. I never once doubted that. I didn't like how our relationship was playing out in those times where they were not supportive of me, and I'm saying this is who I am, and I was being told, no, you're not. I'm saying this is me, and I was told that's not you. And I think our parents, our family members, our loved ones, they need to know that they are wherever they are, and that what's important is to address their own internal conflicts. Because on the one hand, my guess is that they love their child. They absolutely love their child. And they have, whether it's what Derek said about fearing how they might be impacted by being an LGBTQ person in today's world, or if it's probably more like Anne, it is, how are people going to think about me as a parent? Am I going to be seen as a parent who failed? What are my, so our parents have to come out, they have their own coming out process as well. I remember having this conversation a lot with young kids as they connected in this youth organization, this LGBTQ youth organization, and they're like, they found their flock, they found their village, and they're like, oh, I'm going home to come out to my parents right now. We're like, whoa, hold up, let's talk about that. Let's see, what challenges might you face? What are the predictions? You know your parents better than me. How do you think they might take this? And so we try to work with them to say, okay, coming out is great if that's what you want to do, if that's going to make you feel better about who you are, but let's think this through a little bit. And to build a safety net for them, and to build a system, it's a system of care, but build a system to where we can already have in place resources for your parents. What do you think your parents are going to say? How do you think they're going to impact? Then here's some resources, whether it's a formal organization like PFLAG, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, or if it's some other kind of safety net network, or if it's me as a therapist saying, maybe we should do this with your, I'll be with you when you want to do this with your parents, so I can talk with them and just give them the space to deal with what they're dealing with. They're going through stuff too. And so we need to help them and provide resources for them for their own support. There's a great, I'm going to put this link in the chat. There is a great resource that I've used for years called the Family Acceptance Project. And it is based at San Francisco State University. Caitlin Ryan has done a lot of research. Much of the research that we started out with, the data that we started out with, has been a part of that. And this project is good because they address the family needs, the parents' needs to work through, to deal with and address conflict that they have within themselves. There are a couple of videos that address this, primarily looking at the religious aspect and religious/cultural aspects. And one is called For the Bible Tells Me So, and deals specifically with Christian families and how they support their young LGBTQ youth and their journey. And then another one is called Anyone and Everyone, that includes clips of that For the Bible Tells Me So, but it expands it to other religious faiths and practices. And so you have these families from different religions talking about their journey to embracing their LGBTQ youth family members. So I think having those kinds of resources and being able to normalize, if you will, their own conflict, as much as, I just want to focus on the youth and advocate for the youth, looking at their whole family structure, because they're also wanting to stay connected to their families. I wanted to stay connected to my Blackness. I wanted to stay connected to my family. I wanted to go to the family reunion and not feel crazy, and all those things. So we certainly don't want to approach this from an all or nothing perspective, where if they don't accept you, then you just leave, or if they don't accept you, you can just abandon them. That is absolutely not the answer for most of us, if I dare say all of us, that we want those connections. I want to be connected to my parents. And so to help, help normalize this for everyone, and then to help us all move forward, I think is so critically important.
Yeah, that's true. I have there are a few more questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to ask the panel to multitask. So if you all would sort of like tag team each other, I'm going to ask another question, but if maybe one or two of you could go into the Q&A and answer in writing, and that way everybody will get an answer. I want to make sure that all of the questions are answered. And you all are so complete and so wonderful and providing resources. I don't want to stop that at all. But maybe if we do that, do some in writing, and some verbally that we'll get through these. Another question is, any suggestions on how to tackle the issue concern with adults and leaders, folks, who are offering identity and leadership development, but ignoring or blocking LGBTQ plus topics?
So I would say you can't, to anybody who is doing that, I would tell them that it's counterproductive and that you can't have one without the others. Oftentimes it is Black trans women who are putting their life and limbs on the line at these protests when Black men are senselessly gunned down. It's Black trans women, Black trans people organizing movements, moving resources, making the spray to get the pepper spray out of their eyes. Like, that's the things that we're behind the scenes doing, and then at the same time being told that's white folk stuff. Keep that out of here.
Mm.
So you really can't, like, things don't move without like us together. So unless it's all of us, it's going to be none of us. And so I would encourage them to acknowledge that. I encourage people to learn about like the March on Washington and how the logistics were organized and how, you know, Bayard Rustin was such an integral piece of that. I didn't learn that until I was an adult because it's a piece of history that was kept away from me. But there's a lot of things like that that are woven into history, and people who are really like movement makers understand that it takes all of us, not some of us. And so I would encourage people to look at that, and I would encourage the people who are under that leadership and who are in that, who are in those minorities, to organize within themselves. And I do a lot of work that's like parallel to HIV work. And one of the Denver principles is nothing about us without us. So we can't have like things about Black people without things about Black trans people, without
Right.
things about Black, you know,
Right.
it's really nothing about us without us. That travels everywhere.
Derek, you're good at those taglines.
I
Oh my
see.
God. Oh my goodness. I'm like quoting everything you're saying. I mean, you're really, really good at that. I really appreciate that. I'm thinking of all these t-shirts. It's like, getting those made with a lot of those taglines. Oh my goodness. That,
I was
yeah,
thinking
you
of-
see, yeah, folks are quoting you. I hope that Madison was able to get some of those before she left. She had to go to class. But let's see, I have another one. Thank you all who are answering and writing. Another one, my husband works in the substance abuse treatment field and has talked about an increase in Black LGBTQ clients seeking professional help. Do any of your organizations work specifically with substance abuse in youth populations and the stigmas that go along with being LGBTQ, Black, and have substance use disorders?
Well, one thing I'll say about that is I was a certified substance abuse professional before I became a licensed mental health counselor, and certainly before I became a professor. And while I benefited from the system that currently exists, where substance abuse counselors don't have to have the same training, as much training as mental health counselors, I disagree with that. Again, I benefited from that model many, many years ago. And fortunately, I got a lot of training even before I was able to, before I got a master's degree. But so I would say one thing that you want to keep in mind is that substance use disorders, the substance use itself is a symptom of something else that's going on, or a whole collection of issues and problems that are happening. And so when we look at our system of separating out substance abuse from the other mental health presenting problems, substance abuse, substance use disorder, they are part of the mental health domain. And what we've done is we've have the people with the most complicated issues, depression, anxiety, trauma. There's a lot of trauma with people who are dealing with substance use disorders. And on top of that, we have the substance use disorders and all the other risky behaviors and stuff that tend to go along with that. So you have the least trained people working with the most complicated presentations. It makes no sense. So I would caution using sources that are strictly substance use treatment. And if it's not what we call co-occurring treatment, meaning that we understand that there is a relationship between substance use and mood disorders and thought disorders and past experiences, especially with trauma, then that's probably not the best resource. That may be helpful, but it might not be the best. I would look for a resource that is mental health, and you have people trained in working with substance use disorders, or that is a dedicated we used to call it dual diagnosis, we call it co-occurring now. I would look for resources that provide co-occurring treatment, so you make sure that we're really addressing those underlying issues and not just sticking to the substance use problem.
I listed some organizations in the chat. And even, I'm not sure if you're in Atlanta or not, the person who asked the question, but even if you're not, those organizations have national ties. So they'll be able to point him in the right direction to get some sort of support.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, there's another question. It's about how would you go about uncovering a client's value in terms of interventions and techniques from a culturally centered perspective?
Listen to them. That's it. Start out by asking them to tell you what their values are, what they value, what their worth is, what they are interested in, what they appreciate. I love Derek's example about Bayard Rustin, who is one of my heroes. And I, like you did, when I learned about Bayard, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like, he's me. And so I think having sort of yes, I too can organize a march on Washington. I too can teach powerful leaders about anti-violent approaches to social justice. And he did. So I think having some of those examples in your space and talking about queer icons and normal, regular everyday people in the environment, people here on this campus who I know are Black and queer, and then some of those more national figures, having representation in the space, in my office, and talking about these heroes and sheroes in very natural and normal, but positive and celebratory ways, I think is important. So that gives the young people a North Star, if you will. They say, oh, well, gosh, like I did with Bayard Rustin, it's like, oh, he could be that. Back then, oh, certainly I could be me now.
Mm-hmm. Suddenly, if they can see it, they can be it. It makes sense. Visibility really does matter.
Yeah.
And I put it in the chat. We're all experts in our own experience. One of my mentors, Tori Cooper, she says that all the time. Listen to them. Listen. And I'll also say to anybody who's watching this, and you're a healthcare provider, if you're a parent, teacher, whatever, see what's going on in your local area and show up to those events, because that's how you get connected to community. And when somebody comes to you, you can like reach back and connect them. That kind of stuff matters. And go and just listen. Just go without an agenda. That's how Dr. West Olatunji and I connected. We were in a place and we were able to just talk. And I didn't have an agenda. She didn't have an agenda. And we just talked. And so that really reaching into your own community, wherever you are, I promise you there's something going on. There's some sort of Trans Day visibility event happening next week. Something is going on. Show up. And if you can't show up, send them $5 or $10, donate. Mm-hmm. Share their flyer on your social media, but like showing up and being connected is what really counts when you're trying to find some common ground with a client. Like that, those kinds of things really matter.
Absolutely. Mm.
And I like to add on to that, Derek and Dr. Wynn, like showing up and also showing up as your true self. I know in many spaces, like as professionals and providers, as much as we can put like words out there, be your true self, authentic connections, in many cases, we're not showing up like that, right? Like we're not sharing our identities. We're not modeling what it looks like to say my wife and talk about, you know, what we've gone through in a very just dialogue, open, I am who I am conversation with the community. So I just want to urge folks, especially folks like me who can very easily pass, right? You can't look at me and know that I'm LGBTQ. And so kind of dropping that mask, dropping that privilege, and being cognizant of being vulnerable first, I think is really important when we're showing up to those spaces, when we do have those representations. Because I've been in spaces where, yes, we have Baugh on the wall and we got my Lord Audrey on the wall. And then when I hear the leaders, yes, my Lord.
I love
but then when I hear the leaders start to speak, there is no real connection, right? And so I think we really have to be like real with ourselves and show up real in those spaces. And that's when you really, really make those connections. So yeah, just be yourself too.
I love that. Can
I
I?
was gonna say, y'all are really getting comfortable right now.
I know. I love my Lord, Audrey. That I got that one. I'm sealing that one.
I like it.
Amy
Amy said, show up real. I like
I
it.
know.
I like it,
Wait,
Amy.
something
Yes.
I think is so important is to not assume, especially with very young kids. Derek, you touched on this earlier, that we often hear that kids are too young to know. And so while on some level, like you mentioned, that we are evolved as young kids, we de-evolve, we come into ourselves. But we know fairly early on, we may not have all the words for it, the contemporary language for it, but we know how we feel about the little girls in the neighborhood or in the family or the community, or the little boys in the community or whatever, and we begin to figure that out. But for most of us as young kids, we're not just simply asked, well, if somebody says, I was always asked, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? And so that was making an assumption about who I am. And so I think instead, finding your comfort with using gender neutral terms until you know. If you know, then you know. But if you don't know where somebody is on the spectrum of gender identity, sexual orientation, then especially if you're inquiring about their romantic interests and all those things, don't make assumptions about the pronouns of their romantic interest. Stay neutral, and that gives the young person space to tell you who they are. And I think that sends a powerful message. And then, of course, when you understand who they are, their names, their pronouns, their interests, then actually honoring that taps into and creates space for them to be their authentic selves and highlights their value.
And I would add to that, when you say acknowledge them in their authenticity, when they tell you, hey, my name is Derek, my pronouns are he, him, and his, don't call them something else because it's what you remember and it's what's comfortable for you. Because what you're saying by doing that is, I don't care like who you think you are. I know better than you. I don't care how you feel. I do not value you. I'm not listening to you. That's what all of those things say. When you choose comfort over intention, that's what those things say to us. And when they are correct, and I said this yesterday too, when a child or LGBTQ youth is correcting you, hey, actually, these are my pronouns, this is my name. When they're doing that sort of thing, please take it and cherish it, because that is a child, that is a young person who wants you around. They want you in their life, so they're trying to teach you how to treat them. So please take that and don't be offended with it.
There's another question that popped up. So obviously, folks are with you and you're stimulating them in that way. This person says, I work in the early childhood field and wondering if there are any books you suggest for children by Black authors, love that, who have Black children centered in talking about LGBTQ. Yeah, I know I do a lot of early childhood work and I can think of a bunch of books, but they're not focused on Black children. And they're not by Black authors. So
or LGBTQ. So it sounds like we might have a writing agenda here.
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but All Boys Aren't Blue is by George M. Johnson. It was just banned in Florida not that long ago.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
we should look at the Florida banned list for all the stuff.
Exactly. There you go. That's the way to do that, is to pull up and you can pull it up. You can pull up the Florida banned books list. Get all of those.
They've already done the certain. They already curated it for you. Everything you don't want me to know. Everything.
I love it.
Thank you. I so appreciate it.
Hey, please somebody email our governor about and thank him for that.
Totally.
There's another
Totally.
one by a young man, and I know him, but I think it's called My Name is Troy, and it's about like a little boy, like a 7 or 8-year-old who is coming into his trans identity, and it's like a picture book. So I'll find that real quick and send the link.
Mhm. And some of the children's book that are not by Black authors and may not explicitly deal with Black LGBTQ youth might also be helpful. So there can be a mix of things. We certainly want to encourage and support Black authors, especially when they're dealing specifically with our youth. But there may be some others. And so I think of one, and Tango Makes Three is how my dog got his name. And that's a children's book that's been on the banned books list for decades. And it's called And Tango Makes Three. And it's about two chin-strap penguins in the Central Park Zoo, male penguins who formed a relationship. And so I won't tell the whole story, but anyway, so they formed a relationship and then they were given an egg to nurture and they had a chick named Tango. And so when my husband and I adopted a dog, that's what we named the dog, because he was the third person in our family. Or the third entity, I should say.
No,
he's a character, right?
It's like got attitude.
He does. So some of those titles could be helpful as well. And so, and that story is all about animals and which actually may
Which is helpful for young children.
exactly. So to know that that two boys liking each other in a romantic way exists throughout the animal kingdom. It's not just in humans.
And it's a great opportunity developmentally to establish for children what normalcy is, what reality is, very, very early on. So they have healthy attitudes about their encounters with people, and are very open and inclusive. And so that whole thing of the box that a lot of adults are in, with the pronouns and, with everything, it's like, it's wonderful to be able to work with children very, very young, and be able to help them to just have a completely different attitude toward people, toward the diversity of the human condition, and so on. So, yeah, it's a great way to rehumanize people by starting with children, and doing that. Yeah, my two moms and me, yeah, there are those, and there's children with adult parents. So I think there's Heather has two mommies, I think is another one, and so on. So there are those that are out there, but I would like to offer, so if anyone is interested in writing a concept paper, they're usually about 8 to 12 pages long. They're practitioner oriented, not meant to be academic whatsoever. But if you would like to write something that talks about young children, I'm particularly interested in that question right there. There aren't a lot of resources. So if you'd like to be able to write something about that, that we could put up on our website as a resource for people, I invite you to contact me. I'll put my email in the chat, but just contact me. Again, you don't need to be a big writer or anything, but just to put that information out there. What do you think young children need to know? How should parents work with young Black children who are toddlers, who are preschoolers, who are elementary school children? How should educators talk to them? How should mental health folks work with them? And so on, just doing basic human stuff, not deep-seated trauma. We're just talking about how can we create another generation of humans who are respectful, and open. So I'm interested. If anybody wants to contact me, including the panelists, I would love to commission a paper to work with young children. Let me put my email. in the chat.
One thing, I added a couple of books, but one thing I also want to add from, again, that educator perspective is that often what I hear in these spaces are, oh my gosh, the kids are too young to learn about these things. Our kids are learning about mommy and daddy. They are learning about family structures in pre-K. And so to Derek and Dr. Wynn's point, like, let's make it neutral and inclusive, right? Like, we're not saying mommy and daddy, we are saying parents. There are already words in our language that we are used to using without even adding in additional terminology. That if we are just aware of it, we are not teaching kids from the very beginning this binary system. We should not be lining up kids by boys and girls, right? And so there are just certain ways that the system is genderized at a very young age that we can eradicate without rocking the boat, so to speak, and uplifting some gay agenda. I think it's just really important that we understand there are so many different family types and so many different types of people. And so once we ground our kids in that from a very early age, these more specific concepts around identity won't be so unattainable and ungraspable to allies and LGBTQ students.
I agree.
Absolutely. We need everybody. Absolutely. Let me, we are down at the end. We have 5 minutes.
Okay.
So just a final reminder about our April survey. If somebody could put the link in for next month, where we actually will be talking about early childhood next month. So we definitely want to include some of this in the discussion next month. And also, we encourage everybody to connect with us on social media. We're there. Hopefully, Madison had the opportunity to do a lot of posting on our social media sites before she had to go to class. Dr. Pettion, would you like to ask our panelists if they have any other things that they'd like to say?
Yes, the conversation was flowing so nicely. I just wanted to leave it open. So if you have any final remarks, I know typically we get a lot of questions about, this stuff was so rich, the statistics are great, but like, what do I do? But I feel like this conversation, that kind of those practical suggestions came up very organically. I do feel like folks have some things that they could take away and implement into their parenting, their work, their school, wherever. Including, physical resources like books and events and things like that. So thank you for that. But just please share any final remarks that you have for our audience.
Well, real quick, I wanted to add on to what Nicole was saying when you were talking about the gender binary. And one of the first things that I worked with my therapist about was she had to get me to understand that more than one thing could be true at once. There was not just this way or this way, and if you don't do one of these two things, that you're wrong. And I think when we approach children with that, like there's a multitude of things that can be right, and just because your right doesn't look like my right doesn't make it wrong. I think that's a great way to approach children, and I think it's okay if for me, my trans is very binary. I'm very affirmed in the fact that I'm a man, I'm a dude, like, and that's what it is. But for other people, and sometimes it's more fluid, but for other people, they're like, no, I use he, they pronouns, this, that, and the third, and that doesn't make them right or me wrong. It makes us all under the same umbrella. So I think if we can approach everything with a more inclusive thought process and a non-binary process, so to speak, we can get a little bit more understanding if we give each other a little bit more latitude, as long as it's done with respect. And I just want to thank y'all for having me, and I will yield to the other panelists.
Nicole, I will say that, just one more point on that. We don't want to let go of this point about the non-binary, but also when I think of other family types that we have cast as problematic in the past. So when I think about single motherhood, father absence, and I know that there can be challenges associated with those experiences, but there are a lot of powerful and dynamic people who grew up with single mothers or didn't, or single fathers, and so I think we also need to be careful about how we frame other types of families as well. So if we're going to be inclusive of all family types, and I think that helps with the families that are maybe LGBTQ family. I will say, in addition for just being grateful for the invitation to join this conversation, um, keep the conversation going with yourself and with your trusted network. If you don't have a trusted network, then that's your assignment. Fine, to begin to develop one. But having this conversation with yourself, you know where your concerns lie, what your conflicts are, what your skills are, what you might need to be a more effective therapist, teacher, leader in the community, or whatever. And take this opportunity to really turn inward and ask yourself some of the hard questions, or to address some of the issues that we raised here today, particularly if they are impacting your ability to connect with Black LGBTQ youth and support them. It is your opportunity. It's your opportunity to continue growing. And I personally believe as long as we live on the planet, there's an opportunity to evolve and to grow. Thank you so much. I really appreciate seeing and being with you all.
Amen.
All I really want to say again is that I love you. I thank you all for like being here. This is an action. This is a step in the right direction. And just, stay courageous, stay brave, even as allies, right? It's easy to be silent. It's easy to look the other way. It's easy to turn off the TV, right? And not call your senator or actually do something about the things that you're seeing. So just know that you are a part of the village, and, take that courageous step forward, whether it be inward or outward, to support our LGBTQ Black youth. We are your sisters, we are your brothers, we are your family, we are your leaders, we are a part of your family. And so just grateful to be here and grateful to now be a part of the Crest Village as well.
Oh.
Today is voting day. I put in there, make sure you vote. I put vote, but only vote once, because we don't want them to throw it out. Please vote.
All right, y'all, we're 1 minute over. Thanks everybody for coming and being a part of this. Did you see we had somebody from Argentina who joined us? That was so fantastic. Exactly. So we never know who's gonna show up with us today. So thank you so much. Derek said he didn't hear the music. Did anybody hear the music at the beginning?
I did not.
Dang, what a darn shame. It was beautiful.
You want to try it again?
Well, yeah, we have a closing jingle. So let's see if we can hear it.
We just want to thank all of the panelists. I mean, Dr. Wynn, Mr. Baugh, Ms. Young-Turner, all of you were amazing. I appreciate all of your excitement, enthusiasm, the freshness and innovation of thought and suggestions for everyone. We're really happy to have you a part of this webinar and as part of the Crest Family Village.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hear bits of it.
You can hear it a little bit.
Did you click the little
It's
button at the
faint.
bottom? Did you check the box at the bottom that says share sound? When you share your screen, you got to share sound too.
Well, another skill of Derek. Derek, I'm telling you, got these quotes and one-liners, and you know how to get this sound going. Okay, so go ahead.
Right, folks. That's it. Don't know where you're going, but you got to get out of here. See y'all
I
next
love
month.
that.
Y'all take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank y'all. Bye-bye.
Thanks again.